Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast series for financial advisors. Today's episode is The Best of the Best, 10 Ways Top Advisors Are Growing Their Businesses. It's a special industry update with Louis Diamond. I'm Jason Diamond, and this is the Diamond Podcast for financial advisors.
At Diamond Consultants, our mission is to help advisors live their best business life. We want every elite advisor to find exactly the right place for their business and their clients to thrive, whether it's at a wirehouse, a regional, boutique, or independent firm. As the industry's leading recruiters and consultants, we've transitioned more than $250 billion in assets under management in the past decade, and each year, 25% of transitioning advisors who manage $1 billion or more are our clients. If you'd like to talk, please feel free to give us a call at 908-879-1002. Are you a financial advisor who's curious about whether you're in the best place to serve clients or if there might be a better way to optimize your business for the future? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a new book that serves as a self-guided journey, walking you through the key steps that Diamond Consultants takes with our advisor clients, whether considering change or not. Visit diamond-consultants.com/thebook to learn more.
One of the most rewarding parts of our work is the sheer volume of conversations we have with advisors across every model and stage of growth. And that gives us a unique vantage point. We're constantly seeing what's working, what's gaining traction, and what some of the industry's most successful advisors are doing to move the needle. So in this episode, Louis joins me to share the best of what we've been hearing, the ideas that stood out, sparked aha moments, and made us say, more advisors should hear this. From creative team structuring and liquidity programs to succession as a growth strategy and building digital infrastructure before a transition, this list is loaded with ideas worth considering. Some are firm-level innovations, while others are grassroots tactics, but all are designed to help you grow smarter, not just bigger. We picked the best of the best that we've heard. I'm sure there are many more, and always suggest that you reach out and share any we missed. And while not every strategy will be right for every advisor, we hope this serves as a thought starter, a menu of possibilities to explore with your team. There's a lot to talk about, so let's jump right in. Louis, thanks for joining me. Fun topic today.
Yeah, of course. This is one of my favorites that we're doing. So excited to dig in.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, the way I explain this topic is basically we speak to 1,000 advisors. This is the best ideas we heard that kind of had our ears perk up and we're like, you know what? I'm writing that down and I might steal that one. And then we're going to share it with our viewers. So I think let's just go back and forth. I'll tackle the first one here, which is the idea of multi-generational team stacking. I call it stacking. And the idea of this is to have a deep bench of talent where teams have let's say one advisor at every approximately 10 years in the career trajectory. So maybe you've got a junior advisor in their 20s, like a low-level, mid-level advisor in their 30s, and then the core advisors in their 40s and 50s with the senior most advisor who's probably thinking about retirement and succession in the coming years in his 60s. And that makes a business very saleable, very movable. It ensures clients have continuity. I think it's a smart strategy on a lot of levels. Anything you'd add to that one before tackling the next?
No, I agree. I mean, I like every 10 years, so it gives you probably 3 generations or so of advisors within the firm. And as the 20-year-old matures, the 60-year-old looks for retirement, everyone can matriculate. And it kind of provides a rinse repeat framework that as the 20-year-old becomes 30, the 30-year-old becomes 40, et cetera, that you backfill those individuals. And what we've seen too is it's really hard to find and attract, we'll say, more experienced advisors, especially with books of business. So if you're a firm that has the ability to train up folks and invest in them, you can typically find really good, smart, and hungry talent that you can mold earlier in their careers. So I think it's a very smart one.
It's actually a great point you raise, which is there's sort of this element of that means that the senior most advisors are probably kind of subsidizing, at least monetarily, the 20-something advisor for a period of time. But the point of this is you're kind of paying the piper. You need to plant those seeds early because we hear from too many advisors like, oh, I don't have any sort of training program. I have no succession plan and I'm 60 years old and this is the first time I'm thinking about it. I'll let you tackle the next one. Tell me how you see the best teams and advisors using digital marketing to build their businesses.
Yes, digital marketing can mean a lot of different things. It could mean pay-per-click advertising on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and Reddit and Google, et cetera. It could mean a content strategy. It could mean doing videos and distributing them. So a lot of different things. And some of the answer is going to depend upon what type of firm or environment an advisor's at. If they're practicing at a wirehouse or they're captive to a bank, et cetera, they're going to be somewhat limited by what they can do on the digital marketing side. They may be able to share their firm's digital marketing. Maybe, depending upon the firm, they can do a podcast. Maybe there's some marketing they can do to specific niches. But where we've seen the real power of this are in more independent frameworks, especially advisors who focus on a niche, whether it's law firm partners or women who find themselves inheriting money or professional athletes, or a firm that's focused on ultra high net worth clients who just sold a business within the Pacific Northwest. These firms have a really interesting opportunity to very specifically target folks in this venue. And digital marketing, it could be expensive, but I think if you find the right consultant to help you put it together, you have smart content and original things, you'd be shocked that not every firm is doing this. Like very few actually do digital marketing well. And the customer acquisition cost is very manageable, depending upon how much you want to spend. I mean, you can invest a couple $100s a week, you can invest $100,000 a week. So some scale can help with having a larger digital marketing budget, but there's ways to do it in bite-sized pieces. And to me, in this industry, the customer acquisition cost is fairly negligible compared to the lifetime value of a client. So in other words, paying $50 for a new client, $100 for a client is worth it within a very quick period of time, because typically firms retain 96, 97, 98% of their clients. They're charging 1% or 80 basis points or 70 basis points of fee. So very quickly, there's an ROI. And the other benefit of this is buyers look for organic growth strategies absent market appreciation. So if you have a digital marketing framework or strategy, it's something that either you can pour gasoline on the fire, so we'll take on private equity and be able to really blow this out, or it's something that a buyer would like because you have an ability to grow your business without relying upon market appreciation.
That's a great point. Let me ask you a different question on that. How often do you view digital marketing or the desire to do digital marketing as a catalyst for movement? Does that come up as advisors saying, I want to do more of this? Or is this typically, you don't know what you don't know, and then you end up in this open architecture sandbox and you have this aha moment?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, there's plenty of advisors who, whether because of the pandemic or when the market's down 25%, that feel like a real need and desire that they want to put out real-time market commentary or put out a video, or just put out thought leadership that doesn't take weeks or months or never gets approved. We definitely see this as a driver or motivator for folks, especially considering the independent space. But what I see too is it could be the bright, shiny object that everyone thinks it's easy to do. If I did this, I'm going to grow my business. But when it's all said and done, it's a lot of work, a lot of follow through, a lot of preparation, and fairly few firms actually commit to it. And I think that's the key. I mean, we've been doing this podcast for almost 8 years. And if we didn't stick with it for the first 10 episodes or so, we very easily could have just forgotten about it or gotten busy. So it takes real commitment and focus. And advisors have a ton of other priorities, whether it's moving the business or acquiring clients or investments, et cetera, et cetera. It could be a driver, but typically there has to be, I think, more to it, because people are going to be disappointed if the only reason they're moving is to do digital marketing.
And that's kind of what I was getting at. Like, I feel like we hear from advisors a lot, not blaming their firms, but almost like woe is me mentality of, I wish I had this broader sandbox. I wish I could do more. And then when you press a little bit, like, okay, what sorts of things would you like to do? Well, I don't know, just in general. But I think you're right that to actually do this and do this well and consistently and not as a hobby, quote unquote, is hard. And it can be a real differentiator. So that's a good one.
One other point I'll make is you don't necessarily have to become an independent business owner to do digital marketing. We've seen firms like Raymond James and RBC and Stifel, even Wells Fargo in pockets, allow advisors to create their own content. You do have to live and die by SLAs on review times. They could be pretty quick though. And you have to be a little bit more guarded with what you can say, et cetera. But it doesn't mean if you're interested in digital marketing that you have to be independent. That is definitely where the gloves are off and you have pretty much an unfettered ability to grow digitally, but there's different ways you can do it.
Yep, absolutely true. And in fairness, in defense of the firms themselves are spending heavily on digital marketing. So the wirehouses are doing this on behalf of their advisors in some capacity. The next one I want to mention, this is less a strategy that advisors are doing themselves and more, I think, a really interesting tactic that we're seeing more advisors take firms up on, which is firms helping to facilitate liquidity and succession. And I guess the wirehouses probably deserve the credit for starting this trend with their sunset programs. But what I'm talking about are, I guess we could call them like Sunset Program 2.0. So these are programs that allow for the transfer of the book from Gen 1 to Gen 2, but in a more creative way than the typical sunset program. Because the reality is, the typical sunset program, the next gen doesn't even really own the book of business when all is said and done. And there's pretty significant handcuffs that come with it. So, as an example of this type of program, LPL, through their Winsco channel, offers a liquidity and succession program whereby they pay a very considerable recruiting deal. And then they also have the ability to basically help the senior advisor monetize the book of business and pass it on to the Gen 2 over time. And there are many firms offering similar such programs with a greater degree of flexibility than the wirehouses. And the reason I mention this is because I think there's a perception that only the wires have retire in place programs. And the reality is, many independent firms and even regional firms and boutique firms also sort of see that as a critical piece of an advisor's business to solve for. And more firms are doing interesting things in the liquidity and succession arena. So if you're an advisor who feels like, I've got this really unique need and I just don't know that another firm's going to be able to solve for it, this is one area where firms have gotten, I think, infinitely more creative in recent years, is helping senior advisors solve for the dual mandates of monetizing the business and also succeeding out of the business.
Yeah, I think the other point to add is when an advisor sells or transfers their practice as a W-2 employee within a firm, there's significant tax consequence. It's ordinary income. The payment stream happens typically over a 5-year period, sometimes over a 3-year period, where I think what you're talking about is kind of the melding of wirehouse sunset deals and M&A that we see with independent firms and RIA. You can actually sell your business for capital gains. You can get much more money up front quicker. And I think what's really interesting too is the successor ultimately legally owns the book of business at the end of the day. So yeah, it's, I think, a brilliant way. I like what you said about succession planning or sunset deals 2.0, because it's kind of the best of both worlds. You get the bird in the hand of a wirehouse sunset deal, but you get the tax benefits, the valuation increase, and the speed of payments that you see for RIA M&A. So I love it. I think other firms are going to catch on to this one quickly because it's a great idea.
I totally agree with that. Let me ask you an unrelated question here, but you just reminded me of, I think, an important topic. Recruiting is really expensive. And you hear, as I do, from hundreds of firms a year saying, help us to recruit, we want to grow. But the reality is, to recruit advisors with a book of business, we talk all the time about how much optionality top advisors have and how expensive it is to recruit. So the next trend I'd love for you to address is, what are your thoughts on, or are you seeing firms looking to recruit advisors without a book of business, just as a cheaper and more effective way to grow?
Absolutely. I tell people when we're engaging with folks on the executive search side of our business, that if you have lead flow, if you have a training program or mentorship program, you're far and away better off recruiting over advisors without books of business. It doesn't mean they're 1 year out of college. It could mean they're 15 years into their career. They're a JD, they're a CPA. They have the right experience. They come from a private bank where they have non-solicits and can't bring their book. So you get oftentimes really credentialed and successful advisors, CFPs, CFAs, et cetera. But the benefit is it's far cheaper to bring them over. You either don't have to pay them anything to join you, where you give a 1 or 2 year salary guarantee. You can typically keep them on a salary and bonus framework rather than giving them 50% or more of their revenue each year. You own the book of business, so they're not flight risks, they're controllable, et cetera. So if you kind of have the flywheel built, you maybe through digital marketing or referrals from CPAs, or you have a capacity issue and you have B and C clients you want to pass off, or you bought a business and you need a successor for that business, it's far better to first try to find advisors who can add that capacity rather than advisors with books. The benefit of advisors with books, aside from being flashy and catching headlines, is an immediate boost in revenue and valuation. And oftentimes someone with the book is battle tested. You know, if they have 200 million under management, for instance, that they have the ability to bring in clients and service them. So it's kind of like a test. And the ROI could be quicker, but the key word is could, because if you're paying them a ton of money to come over, they're not going to be that profitable to you for a while, and or they have a poor transition, they could be more expensive. So I'm a huge fan of firms pushing their chips to the middle of the table and looking to add multiple servicing or support advisors or relationship managers rather than saying we're only open to folks with books of business.
So I love it. And I think of this as almost like, so you imagine a wirehouse team where they hire somebody to be maybe a client associate or a wealth associate or a paraplanner, somebody relatively junior. And the hope is that over time, that person cuts their teeth, they learn the ropes, and they become a star. And slowly but surely, maybe they're not able to prospect for their own business just yet, but they're able to say, you know what, I can take your C and D clients and I can be the guy to help you service your C and D clients. And then over time, I've brought in 2 or 3 small clients. And then slowly but surely, you've built up a junior financial advisor who has hopefully the chops to be a real successor for you in the future. And that's, I think, similar to what you're describing here, is this is a great way to, it's not necessarily taking somebody who's a year out of college with no experience. These can be senior, sophisticated people, but if they don't have a book of business, they immediately become a lot cheaper and easier to recruit. And then hopefully, at the very least, the skill set to service a book of business is different than the ability to source new business, but maybe they become a star down the line, right? I think it can become a real development area for future advisors. And have you ever seen that? I mean, somebody going from, say, a salaried advisor type position to a more traditional commission?
I mean, it would be a decision by the firm. Typically, when folks are in the salary model, and salary doesn't mean, they're just going to make 150 grand a year
Right.
and there's no upside. But a lot of times there's the salary component, and the bonus could be tied to net new assets, increase in wallet share, or the amount of revenue that the advisor is managing. So you can kind of meld the two. I think probably more likely or more common would be an advisor without a book, really kicking butt and rising through the ranks, and then becoming a partner and eventually becoming a member of the C-suite or an executive. I feel like that happens more often than a firm reflexively saying, hey, we're paying you 300,000 all in. Now, because we feel like it, we're not going to pay you 700 grand. Like advisors leave because of that, because they feel like they become successful enough where they don't want to be trapped in this salary and bonus model. But the key is, if someone came over without a book, they're likely going to have pretty tight employment agreements. They're clients of the firm, and they may not have client control like someone who built their own clients. So I guess it's possible, but more likely it's going to be an escalation of responsibilities, equity, and being part of a future succession plan.
Yeah, I think that's right. Let me ask you too about this next one, because I know this is one that you've been pretty passionate about for a long time. As more and more teams consider dual paths, let's say specifically wirehouse teams, so top corner office wirehouse teams, regardless of where they ultimately end up, I think we can agree that most wirehouse teams will look at traditional W-2 options, other wirehouses, boutiques, regionals, but they'll also look at independent options. And part of that conversation is, are we prepared to be independent, or is that a bridge too far at this time? And one of the ways I think we explain or combat that fear is this idea that a wirehouse team may be wise to hire a COO. Can you talk about what the strategy is all about and what are the benefits?
I mean, and if you're at a wirehouse, it may seem crazy. Like, why would I hire a COO? I have my 2 admins, I have a investment associate, and I have 2 advisors. Like, why do I need a COO? Like, COOs sound expensive, and the firm is handling a lot of the operations. While that may be true, we're seeing this typically with the 8, 10, 12, $15 million plus teams that really operate like their own mini independent business within a business. A COO, and you can call it something different, but really what a COO's job is in any part of this industry is to take work off advisors' plates and make the firm more efficient, and to handle anything that's not directly client facing. So I love this strategy. I can probably think of 8 to 10 teams just off the top of my head that have a COO, and it's expensive. It's an investment, but the growth that they see is undeniable. It's an ultimate capacity creator. It's an ultimate investment in a business. But the challenging part is no firm, regardless of the size of the team, is going to pay 400 or 500,000 or whatever it might be for a COO. So it's a really intentional investment on behalf of a team. The other cool part is it creates future optionality. If you're running as a business within a business of a big firm and you have a COO, you kind of have the executive team built. it gives you the choice of saying, hey, we're successful here. Let's just keep crushing it. Let's move to another firm and just take the show on the road. Or let's go out and create our own firm and not have to really hire backfill roles. So I'm a huge fan of this. It is expensive. I think you do have to have the scale in order to accommodate it. But I think we're going to see more and more teams do this because the best teams are doing it. And I mean, teams are successful for many reasons, but I think this is a clear one that you can point to as far as efficiency and growth potential.
Yeah, I heard an interesting way of thinking about this from an advisor. I was speaking with a wirehouse advisor who has a COO on their team. And one of the things he said to me was, talk to an advisor and they will rattle off 10 pain points, 10 things that frustrate them about being a wirehouse advisor. And he said 9 of those 10 things are like capacity related types of things. And that's exactly the type of thing that we offload to Mr., in their case, Mrs. COO. I think it's the perfect example. You use the term capacity creator. That's what it's all about. It's all about saying you're spending all this time, probably more time than you even realize, bogged down in the minutia of kind of red tape world. And if you could be 10% more efficient, that has this tremendous compounding effect over time. So I agree with you. I think this is one that it's expensive and there is some red tape, right? It's not a slam dunk these days that at a wirehouse, they'll grant you permission to hire whoever you want. But this is one I absolutely think we're seeing more and more of the biggest and best teams do.
Yeah, it could be like, let's say someone who's in their 50s who just sold their logging business or their accounting firm and wants to get into this business. They have business management capabilities. They don't really want to be an advisor, and they're never going to join you as a CSA or an entry-level advisor. So I like that use case. The other one would be a long tenured admin professional. And this creates a career path and growth trajectory for them where they've been with you for 15, 20 years. They have a ton of standing and respect on behalf of the team. And by changing their title or elevating them, it's a good retention tool. They can think more strategically. And I've seen these folks even handle team reviews and clients, really anything that's not revenue generating. Someone who has this title, I think, has permission to act as more of an executive on the team, which is the best possible way to, in my view, at least, to grow a business.
Love it. Okay, now I'll take the next one, CPA partnerships. And I'm going to take 2 different angles to approach this one because I kind of mean 2 different things. On the one hand is referrals from CPAs. And this is a strategy that any advisor can deploy, certainly wirehouse advisors, but any advisor, obviously. But I think as we talk about the next one, probably more skewed towards the independent side. But the idea here is that clients increasingly like a one single touch point or a holistic feeling to their wealth being managed, almost like concierge level services. And so if they have a trusted CPA, that person probably has their ear and is a very valuable potential referral source. So we've heard from wirehouse advisors literally going door by door to different CPA practices and just wining and dining different CPAs, because I think you'd be surprised at how many referral opportunities these folks see, meaning people who have meaningful assets that don't currently have somebody actively managing them. And I use CPA as an example because it's a really obvious one, but this extends to any kind of professional service. I was at a conference recently and one of the founders of Crescent was talking about how they do this with doctors' offices because they know that, senior care facilities and elder care patient facilities are going to come in contact with a lot of, trust and estate managers and folks who have, close contact to potentially significant wealth. So an interesting strategy there in terms of a referral opportunity. And then the other mention of CPA partnerships is especially independent firms doing tax prep planning and the like in-house. And again, that's more to my point about clients liking things kind of consolidated and all under one roof. And from an advisor's perspective, well, you might say, well, that's just creating more work, but it also gives you the ability to add more value, charge more fees, and have more hooks into that client. It makes the client stickier. So anything you'd add on that point?
I think both points are well taken. Yeah, I think just word for the wise on the CPA partnership side. We interviewed Stephen Jarvis on the show a number of episodes back. And one of the pieces of advice that stuck with me was it's quality over quantity. So no one wins by having 37 different CPA firms that you're expecting referrals from. It's better to really invest and lean into 1 or 2 relationships and be on the radar. Take them to lunch once a quarter. Make sure to send them clients, send them information about your process, put words in their mouth of how to position you, make it really obvious and easy for them to connect the dots. But I think you can only do that by investing in 1 or 2 key relationships rather than saying, hey, we need to get in front of everyone. That's just never going to work. There's too many people that are doing that. And then on the tax prep side, I absolutely love it. The other benefit aside from raising fees is there's an M&A opportunity too. Typically, CPA firms are worth a small fraction of what an RIA is worth. So I've seen RIA firms or wealth management firms or independent firms acquire multiple CPA firms for 1x revenue or less. And that will have an ROI. You'll be able to roll that business into a future sale, their business at a higher multiple. And then you can start cultivating the clients of that firm, bring your clients into it. And I think that not all firms are created equal. So if your firm is focused on the high net worth, the minimum client's 5 million, you don't want to buy just any mom and pop CPA firm. You ideally want to find a firm that's best in your market, or where you have a good symbiotic relationship already, or where the end client for that CPA firm is fairly similar to yours.
I think that's spot on. Jumping around a little bit here, but again, this was kind of supposed to have a little bit of that feel to it because this was really well and truly feedback we heard in real conversations with advisors. The next one I want to bring up, I've heard you talk about this concept. We hear more and more from advisors close to retirement, need a successor, looking for a successor, or have a successor and don't know, should I stay in place? Should we transact the business? Should we move elsewhere? Blah, blah, blah. I've heard you talk about succession as a growth opportunity or a growth strategy. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is, like, to our point earlier, it's bloody competitive to recruit advisors with books or to acquire firms underneath you. You either have to have a ton of capital, but you also have to have a really differentiated value proposition and probably get a little bit lucky too. So what I've found is a ton of advisors, probably most advisors, would kill to be the successor for a quality business. Either they're an individual advisor or a team of advisors, or they're running a small or mid-sized firm that would love to be a successor. So to me, a savvy owner, not at retirement, like you can't do this 3 months from retirement, but let's say 3 years from retirement. It can't be 10 years because that's just, it seems too pie in the sky. Let's say 3 to 5 years or less from retirement, goes out to the market and says, hey, this is our firm, this is our value prop. What makes us really different is I don't have a successor. So you come in, we join forces, and then you get to take over my book of business. What happens is, one, you definitely stand out versus many other firms who don't offer that. The second thing is the overall pie becomes much more valuable. So when, let's say I'm running a $100 million business and you run a $500 million business and you're the one who's retiring. If I put together the $500 million and the $100 million business, and now I have a succession plan, the overall business explodes in value. So I think it's a unique way to be different and kind of just tying into what advisors value and look for. Like, I've seen advisors that are incredibly happy with the firm, be approached by XYZ firm who has 3 advisors who are in their 60s looking to retire. That advisor may go to that firm. So we know this is a battle-tested strategy. And especially if you're a small firm or you don't have the capital to acquire or to recruit, it's a really good way to grow the overall pie and also solve for succession in the process.
And another strategy actually tied to that maybe you could talk about now too would be, so to your point, this is a common theme, super competitive and super expensive to recruit. So if you're a firm, let's say especially a smaller firm who doesn't have the deep pockets that some other mega players might have, we talk a lot about drag along rights or tag along rights as a form of currency in a deal. And I think that's a good point to talk about it because to me, it falls into this conversation of how do firms get creative in attractive ways to recruit advisors beyond just cash or equity?
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's first worth it to define tag along and drag along rights because they may be a unfamiliar term. So tag along rights would mean you're giving the target or the underlying advisor or business owner the option to join you or tag with you in a broader transaction. So an example would be, I'm running a $300 million firm, you run a $2 billion firm, and in order to bring me over, you offer me optional tag along rights that says, hey, if we sell whenever and we get this crazy high multiple because we're a $2 billion firm, that you'll be able to opt into the transaction at a higher value than what you can get on your own. That's a tag, an option. A drag would be, it's a requirement. So maybe you buy 30% of my business, and then there's a provision that when you have a liquidity event, that it's a requirement that I have to sell the other 70% of my business. So they're related, but they're different. Why I love this and love to get your thoughts is it lets small firms, medium firms, large firms really put something different into the marketplace. and not have to use cash, not have to give away their hard-earned equity. And it's also kind of like a prenup because if, let's say, we're coming together and I'm going to own my business, you're going to own your business, it creates alignment without you having to give me equity in your firm and
Yep.
distributions and all these different classes of shares, et cetera. It kind of functions like equity because we're aligned to grow the firm together. Because if the overall firm sells for more, I get more. And if this doesn't work, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. And it's fairly easy to separate. So I oftentimes advocate firms to try this out. It's not free because if you give away the farm to someone and then they're kind of riding on your coattails, it's not great. But I've seen savvy firms still like make a margin on the underlying business being sold. So let's say I'm a $100 million firm, I would sell for 7 times EBITDA. You're a $2 billion firm that would sell for 15 times EBITDA. And together we'll sell for 16 times EBITDA. Maybe I'll pass through 12 or 13 times to the underlying firm. So it's still almost a double in value for them, but I'm still making 2 to 3 turns on the valuation. So there's a lot there, but I love this. It's like you said, like similar to using succession as a growth strategy. It's a way to do something. It doesn't really cost you anything that where you can be different in the marketplace and accomplish many of your goals. Anything you'd add?
No, I love how you position. Like that's when this works is when it's the win-win scenario, right? I get more, the recruiting firm gets more. The concept here is you obviously have to believe in the equity for this to make sense, but you shouldn't be joining the firm. I oftentimes have to remind advisors of this. Well, if you don't believe in the equity, then why are you even having a conversation with that firm about potentially joining them, right? It's always a little bit of that. Yeah. So I completely agree. This to me is probably not a strategy in and of itself. Like typically this is a component of a deal, but I think our point is this is a more impactful and important component of a deal and probably will be more so going forward as well.
Yep.
Good one on that one. Let's do 2 more here. I'll take one, which is advisors doing diligence on a firm the same way they would as if they were selling a business. You could argue that's exactly what they are doing. Obviously, they're, a wirehouse advisor is not technically doing that because they don't own the equity in their current business. But thinking about their business as a business and considering their business through the lens of almost as if I was selling my company who makes widgets, let me think about my wealth management business exactly the same way. And that probably means multiple bids. That probably means hiring some form of expert representation, whether that's a shameless plug recruiter or some sort of investment banker. It probably means having multiple education conversations with the various industry participants. That means talking to other advisors who have done this before you. And that means conducting periodic due diligence on your own processes and your own firms. So anything you would add to that concept? And I think we've been out in the market for some time now talking about this idea that advisors are taking more of a long-term view and thinking about their business as a business. And that's really what I'm getting at here.
Yep. I think all that is spot on. I think it's just a mindset tweak. Some advisors will spend 2 years doing due diligence, would never recommend it, but they're really in the weeds or they're stuck and they just seemingly have endless amounts of questions. I would argue they're kind of acting as if they're selling their business. Other advisors, I'd say, are a little bit more reactionary. They'll jump at the highest number where they're fairly happy, but they see this crazy deal out there and they'll move pretty quickly to make it happen. Or they'll let a firm kind of bully them into making a decision. And I'd argue they're acting like they're moving a practice, not selling a business. I think the next layer of this is like, look, if these guys are buying my firm, I really have to understand them. So if it's a public company, pour through their 10K, their analyst calls, and really understand like the business drivers. What's their competitive footing? What's their scale? What's their stability? Where's the firm going? And ask those questions of the firm. If it's private, it's a little bit harder. But if the firm is offering you equity in any capacity, you have the right to do a level of reverse due diligence. And you can do plenty of homework these days, even on a private company, a little bit less. But I always think firms respect advisors who respectfully ask to really understand the next level deeper. And if a firm gets testy or doesn't do it, I think they're either hiding something, or they're not going to be a good partner. So I think it's just kind of a big mindset shift. Aside from thinking of your business as a business, it's conducting the due diligence process as if you're selling. Because I think anyone, if they're selling their business, would react in a different way in the process.
That's such a great point, especially because a lot of times advisors are taking 10, 12, 13-year notes. And if you're going to get in bed with a firm for 13 years, I certainly think there's an element of, you're entitled to ask some pointed questions in that regard. All right. Can I throw a little bit of a curveball at you and give you a tough one for the last one here? All right. So I was on the phone with an advisor earlier this week and he gave me a really interesting scenario and I'd love to hear your thoughts. His point was basically, I'm tied to the firm, wirehouse advisor. I'm on a note. I've already got a couple of retire in place agreements. I'm already tied to the firm. Why would I not just continue to do more retire in place deals and further tie myself to the firm? And it made me think. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one.
I love it. You're going to be locked up to a firm for 9, 10 years, whatever it is. The downside of buying books of business within a firm is you're locked up for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So if you're already kind of in prison, and I don't mean that pejoratively, but if you're already locked up, why not make your time more valuable? I think it's a brilliant strategy. The hard part is if you've been at the firm for a year, you're not going to have the same depth of relationships you would if you've been there for 15 years. And also not wanting to get distracted. Like the number one goal of an advisor's transitioning is to serve their clients and move their business over. So I would never advise someone to move over a month in before they really have their footing, start buying businesses, because all you're doing is signing up for a lot of pain and your clients probably aren't going to get the best treatment. But I've seen this a handful of times where an advisor's locked up and they keep inking these retire in place deals. At the end of the day, they got a nice deal to move over. They're presumably at a firm where it's a better fit for them, and their business is going to be much larger and have something that is either bigger to move or that they can sell to someone else when it's time for their succession plan. I think it's a very smart way to look at being locked up on a recruiting deal.
Yeah, that was kind of my reaction as well, was basically you're further handcuffing yourself and binding yourself to a firm. And as long as you can live with that, there's absolutely merits to the strategy. Here's the ask now is for the next couple of months, you got to keep the notebook handy. And the next advisor conversations, when you get the new 10 ideas, we got to be jotting them down so we can do the next edition of this one in a couple of months. But this was the blast.
I would also invite any listener who feels like they were slighted by not being mentioned, or you heard something in a study group or at a conference, just comment on the episode or reach out to us. We'd love to understand, like, we're better at our jobs when we understand different perspectives. And to your point, we'll definitely do this type of episode again. So we'll start kind of the anthology for part 2.
Thanks again, Lewis.
As a financial advisor, you hold yourself to the highest standards of integrity, honesty, and credibility. You are successful because you take your professional responsibilities seriously and are dedicated to your clients. But are you living your best business life? Are your goals aligned with your firm's, or could a better option exist? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a book written with you in mind. It's a self-guided journey that walks you through the key steps that we take with our advisor clients. This strategic thought process and roadmap to professional self-discovery is designed to help you ask the right questions and think critically and objectively, whether you're considering change or not. Learn how to get your copy at diamond-consultants.com/thebook.